Welcome to the Coach Doctor podcast, a podcast where we discuss aspects of sports coaching from grassroots to grandstands. I'm your host, James Barkell, and on this podcast, we hear from academics who research coaching. We talk to coaches on the front line from development levels through to professional coaches, and we discuss other elements of successful sporting programs with experts and practitioners from a range of sports science fields, motivational psychology, strength and conditioning, and many other elements required for successful performance. If you'd like to know more about what we do at The Coach Doctor, you can visit our website, thecoachdoctor.com.au, and learn more about our services, or follow me on Instagram at thecoachdr or Twitter at James_Barkell for more regular information. In today's episode of the Coach Doctor podcast, we're joined by John McKee. John is a seasoned and globally respected rugby coach whose career has spanned club, provincial and international levels. Known for his strategic mind, adaptability and deep understanding of the game's evolution, John has coached across diverse rugby cultures and led high-performance teams on the world stage, including coaching both Tonga and Fiji at Rugby World Cups. With decades of coaching experience behind him, John brings unique insight into how rugby has transformed. He's worked across continents, adapting his leadership style to fit local environments whilst building competitive and resilient teams. In this episode, we'll discuss his coaching journey, the current trends shaping the modern game, and how he integrates strength, skill, and culture into his approach. Whether you're a coach, player, or student of the game, you'll take away practical wisdom and forward-thinking strategies from one of rugby's most experienced minds. John, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, James.
It's an absolute pleasure to have you, mate. To start off, where in the world are you currently based, and what are you currently doing right now in the rugby world?
Yeah, I'm based in Dublin, Ireland. I'm working for the Irish Rugby Union. I've been up here for 2.5 years now, working across their women's elite pathway. And my role is sort of a bottom to top or top to bottom role, with looking at alignment in their high performance pathway through their national talent system, and also working with coaches within the women's game and some coach high performance education, and also mentoring some of the key coaches in that pathway.
So going back to the start of your career, what first drew you into coaching rugby? Was there a specific moment or a mentor or another coach that sparked your interest in getting into coaching?
Look, it's interesting how things evolve. I guess towards the end of my playing career, I was probably starting to think about possibility of getting into coaching, and probably played in an era where a lot of teams I played in were probably player led in terms of senior players had a influence on the way the teams operated, and also the way we played and trained, and I learned a lot from those players, and probably towards my career I was having that sort of influence around the teams. Went into coaching. I saw an opportunity when I stopped playing, and I was in Melbourne at the time, and an opportunity with a club in Melbourne, and I went straight from playing to coaching, which probably wasn't ideal, but I saw the opportunity there and thought the opportunity, take it while it's there. It might not be there next year. So that was really the start of my journey. Rugby was still amateur back then. You know, this was the early 90s, and I actually got involved in the at the time the Australian rugby coaching sort of education thing through their high performance coaching was tied in with the AIS, and Brian O'Shea was working for the Rugby Australia then, very instrumental in the coach development, and was probably Brian who introduced me more to more high performance aspects of coaching and coaching as a craft, away from just the technical aspects of the game, and certainly in the early time of my coaching, and when I moved to Sydney and started coaching Eastwood Rugby Club in the mid to late 90s, Brian was certainly a mentor of mine at that time.
Okay, and you mentioned starting off your coaching journey in Melbourne. What led you to Melbourne? I mean, it's not known for its rugby background.
Yeah, it's funny how life takes you to different places. But I was born in New Zealand. When I moved to Australia, I initially moved to Melbourne, not really knowing anything of the sporting landscape of the country. I moved to Melbourne because I knew people there, and and initially playing rugby in Melbourne, I did have a stint in playing in Sydney in the 80s and moved back to Melbourne. So I'd have spent quite a bit of time in Melbourne during my time in Australia, and I love the city, but the sporting landscape down there it was quite different. It's a bit of a culture shock for a young 21-year-old Kiwi coming to Australia, expecting there to be rugby clubs everywhere, and finding that it was actually difficult to find a rugby club.
Yeah, just predominantly AFL, and
Yeah.
that they didn't sign you up into an AFL club and get you out there taking marks or anything like that, speckies and all that sort of stuff. Looking back again at your career, you went from moving into coaching in Melbourne, and you talked about that being amateur. So if we look at that as a grassroots level, how did your journey from there lead to one day coaching at the international level and coaching at Rugby World Cups?
Well, there's over quite a time frame there, and I think I feel I got a really good grounding in coaching, and I think I was really lucky at that time to be exposed to some of the programs they were running through the AIS then, and Rugby Australia's close association there with their coach development, and the under 21s program was also the national under 21s program was also through the AIS. So having that opportunity to go to Canberra to some workshops and some living coaching ed camps and be exposed to other sports and see how people were doing things. I mean, it was quite an eye opener. I think at that time, rugby had just gone professional, and it was like a whole new world. For me, it was learning more about coaching teams, but also the exposure to other sports and see what coaches were doing and how I guess different ways of doing things, and that was important for me.
And were there any other sports or coaches from other sports that stood out to you in terms of this is something that you really hadn't seen or thought about from a rugby perspective, but it could translate into rugby? For example, I think about rebounding in basketball could be a great thing for catching the ball off the restart or for line out jumping or something like that for locks in rugby. Was there anything that really stood out to you?
Yeah, well, certainly, at that time at the AIS, their big programs were around basketball and netball, and so whenever we went down there for a workshop, often we were looking at what those teams were doing, and certainly there was a lot of innovative things around reaction times, hand to eye contact, catching, overhead catching, speed of moving the ball, all that sort of thing, which you could see a transfer into rugby. But it was also probably more starting to think about skill development and how you could employ that in rugby, because I think at the time in rugby we were doing skill development, but not to the extent that other sports were doing it, and that was like an eye opener to say, like we can really identify what are the key factors of a skill, and then be innovative around the ways we can incorporate that into our trainings.
And I guess, again, continuing on that learning from other sports idea, are there any coaches that you've witnessed or that you've watched from another sport that has, I guess, stood out to you as like, wow, they do a really good job? And whether it might be their communication style or their leadership style or something that you feel has been really impressive that sort of you've learnt from?
Back at the time, then, I mean, it was hard, like the internet today makes things a lot more accessible to see coaches speaking and more of the the visual and the speaking aspects of things. I think back then it was probably a little bit more difficult. You got snippets of it. Certainly, probably had some contacts around the Sydney Swans, and I used to go in there a little bit and look at what they were doing, and it was different coaches there at different times, and how they could bring the team together and keep the team focused on probably what they were going after, how they pulled the parts together as a head coach was important.
I mean, you've coached rugby now, like you talked about, from the mid 90s, just before it went professional, up until now. We're in 2025, so there's a good at least 30 years of experience that you've got under your belt. How has rugby evolved, either the way the game is played and also the way the game is coached? What are some big things that you've noticed?
Well, the game's almost completely changed. I mean, sometimes I think about that, or we're trying to remember how we actually did things in the 90s. But certainly, I think that when rugby went professional, that's when things really started to change very, very quickly. I mean, up until then, I feel the game was more involved around key players. The tactics were around key players sort of being able to dominate a part of the game and building a team around that. Teams suddenly became more organised in the way that they played the game, and partly I think that is certainly time together. Suddenly teams had a lot more time together. They could get more precise in the way they approached the game, and there were in different parts of the world. I mean, the game was different. Not everyone copied everyone else. There were probably cultural things. The way the game had evolved in different parts of the world dictated the style of play. South Africans were different to Australia and New Zealand. The Southern Hemisphere is different to Europe. France is different to the UK. So although teams were probably getting tactically more aware of the way they were playing, players were understanding their roles in the game much more. Countries were developing styles of play based on the cultural traditions of their game.
We've seen like this big influx in sports science and again in that professionalism of rugby itself. What about things like athlete development? You talked about it's almost like a completely different game. You watch some of those scrums back from the 90s where it was almost like they just that was just like grab each other and just throw themselves into a scrum, whereas now it's very slow and structured, and the size of the front rowers and basically all the forwards and even some of the backs are twice as big as they were. What has happened in terms of athlete development in that time as well?
Well, it's had a huge influence on the sport and the way the game's played. I mean, when for those of us that were coaching in the 90s, I feel that we understood the basics of sports science. Usually aligned ourselves with a good S&C coach and with a similar philosophy, and we develop the fitness of our teams to play the sort of game that we wanted to play. I think it was a lot of gut feeling in that, and not that was wrong. I think that we, and I still look now, and I think that that some of the things we were doing then were very good, and things that maybe I was trying to do as a coach, we were trying to be a little bit different there and building our game on our fitness to play the game. Time moved on. I mean, technology and that whole era is just on a different stratosphere now, and then we started to use GPS was a great innovation. Although in the early days we hardly used it very well. It was just was almost measuring what had been done, not combining it with our planning and looking at is our training matching the intensity of how we want to play the game. And that's very much the case now, that everything in training is monitored from that aspect, and with much more understanding of is our training matching the way we want to play? Are we spending times in training over match intensity to actually make the game a bit easier. But it's also how we review our trainings to understand that are we achieving what we need to achieve.
With that said, that rise in sports science, how have you tended to integrate, data analytics, that technology you talked about, having that use of GPS that used to be more of an analytical tool that's now sort of almost drives your training sessions in terms of the intensities, and you want to try and mirror, almost exceed game conditions in training. How, I guess you personally, and I guess coaches on the whole, how have they tended to embrace that technology and the increase in data and that sort of stuff?
Well, as a coach, I mean, there's a couple of things there. I think firstly is to understand in the planning phases of your season, your weeks, your training sessions, about what you want to be doing, and the importance of the integrating your key S&C staff members in that planning. I mean, ultimately, the rugby comes first. I mean, we're playing rugby. We've got to play the game. So we need to be able to put adequate time into making sure our players are technically and tactically ready to play. But at the same time, we need to make sure that they're physically ready. And there are parts of that are a little bit separate, in that the S&C staff are preparing the players, and that they're really delivering players to the rugby side of things that are ready to go. But also integrating your trainings, because there's quite a crossover to say, well, we're going to play game-like situations, but we need to play with some intensity, and how you measure that. As a coach, you don't need to see all of the data, but you do need to understand what you're going after, and how to review that and look at it with your staff. I think when you see, the high level teams, there is a lot of data there, and people are really crunching numbers behind the scenes and their reviews. I mean, the coach doesn't need all of that data, but that data is very, very important. So you need to know what you're going after and what you're looking for, and having that presented to the back to the rugby staff in a manner that they can clearly understand. And it's also important for the players to be getting some feedback on their trainings around that space as well, and that they understand what they're going after. And maybe, when you're pulling up players for maybe not showing enough, they might not be running enough high-speed meters, or they might not be having enough accelerations in the training. So they actually know, when they look at the training review, what they're looking at, and the things that they need to be aware of.
And I guess in that sense, when you are using data for players, is there any what's the word? I guess is there any accountability that you provide or give the players to say, right, I want you to look at your own data at it might be certain things, different things specific to different positions, whatever it might be. I want you to go and have a look at your own data, see what you're doing. Are you living up to what we need to do to achieve success in the group, or is it predominantly coach-led?
Look, certainly in high-level teams that I've been involved with, there's data post-training does go to the players, just as video review and other things do. And so for the players, that they know the markers that they should be going after, that they can check themselves in training, that they can check themselves against other people in their position, which is important, because it's not the same, a winger and a back row and a prop forward, for instance. The data that they'd be going after in a session could be quite different, but they can compare themselves with others, and it's a competitive world, and especially with squads going into major competitions or preparing for finals and that sort of thing, that where selection's important, that could become a selection factor when players are quite even on the rugby side of things. Is their training up to the mark that's going to make them a winner in the biggest games.
Yeah.
So players will look at that. It's you've sort of got to lead them. They've got to understand what they're looking at too, because they can get, if they don't understand, they can get diverted, and they could be going after the wrong things. And certainly with players who for whatever reason are below the mark around the intensities or the high speed meters or the accelerations or whatever you're looking for in a session, I'd expect that the player would get some feedback around that, and we'd look to ways to improve that, or maybe you have top ups after sessions or in sessions where players who are there were lots of factors going on in trainings. It's not, you can't just hit your markers but you'd be looking over time of achieving this, because on a given day there could be some other factors that affected players' training effort.
And for coaches who might be coming up, or emerging coaches, and they're getting access to things like GPS data for the first time, what for you might be the big rocks, or the low hanging fruit? You mentioned you can get heaps and heaps of data coming across to coaches and to players, but if you went back in time and you were that coach in the early years of your career, and you had access to some of that sort of stuff, what do you think would be some of the best stuff to have?
Certainly for me, I think, understanding the ranges of speed in the game, and for different positions, like in the high speed meters, different teams use different. They might have 4 zones or 3 zones or whatever it might be, but over 85% of maximum speed, that 85 to 60, that 40, those blocks, because the games, I mean, that's what the game is. The game is probably a lot of medium running with some high speed bursts, and like looking at the percentage of running in that high speed area is important. And when you haven't got a lot of data, that's probably a good way of measuring those blocks of training, which you think a game like that, does it compare with the game that you want to play. Other thing, like things like distance and all that type of thing can be affected. Obviously, there's ballpark figures, but it can be very affected by the style of game. So the actual running meters is not the most important. For me, I think the most important is the setting your zones of high speed running, and looking at how much time players can spend in those high zones. And also, if you've got the capabilities of looking at accelerations and deaccelerations, because the number of times that a player accelerates can be quite important.
When you just talked about that, it made me think about the Melbourne Storm, and there's these you hear about it a lot, that they often train to play really fast, and they train faster than they play. Is that, I'm sure that happens a lot in rugby as well. Is that something that you sort of prescribe to, and is that something where you could use some of those high speed meters from GPS data to sort of track if you're meeting those requirements?
Yeah, that's probably another important part of when you allude to there around your GPS work is how, and this is the skill of your tech people in the background, is how they break that down, because then it can be broken down into parts of training, because just the overall picture of the whole session may not give the true picture. There might be a 12-minute block of, say, 4 blocks of 3 minutes where you want to play really high intensity, and that may be the area that you've really got to focus on looking at what players are actually doing. So you need, I don't know how to do it, but the number crunchers certainly do. And that's why, like your training plan is really important, and how you stick to the timings, and your people know that when one section starts, so you can measure it really accurately. But it would be I would imagine quite common. I mean, we've teams I've been involved in have used a lot, and I imagine it's quite common in high performing teams that they do spend time during the week trying to play over intensity of the game, with the view that you're tested at a higher intensity than you will be tested in the match situation. So it tests your skills, it tests your ability to play under you're creating some intensity in training, and you can do that in two ways. I mean, could be, as you talk about the Melbourne Storm doing over speed, so you'd probably do really short blocks, but really try to go really, really fast. Or you can go the other way, which would be to play for longer blocks. If the average in rugby, a lot of the play is 45 seconds to a minute, but you say, well, righto, we're going to play 90 seconds to 2-minute blocks with no stopping. So you're actually playing, you can say, well, we're going to play blocks which are going to be longer than we expect in the game. And then across your week, you would manage that as well, where you tend to play your longer blocks maybe in your big session earlier in the week. So you're really building on your fitness on a week-by-week basis. Whereas closer to the game, maybe in your last big session before the game, you want to be fast. You want the players to feel really, really sharp and fast. So you go for your shorter blocks and look for that greater than game speed.
Yeah, again, that's made me think about, for emerging coaches, we've tend to got this recipe of on the day leading up to, or the week leading up to training. When you do your opposed stuff, it's all right. We'll go for 5 phases, and then we'll swap over, and then the second team will get 5 phases against the first grade side. And you just alluded to training in like blocks of 1.5 to 2 minutes to go over what is consistently the ball in play type of time, or then having a very high pace for 45 seconds to a minute. Looking at it that way over, we'll go for 5 phases. It's a lot more game specific, I guess. Would you suggest that coaches look at doing that more often, or a balance of both is okay? Or then again, at shoot shield and at subbies, where the ball might be in play for different periods than professional rugby, so it might be quite different.
Yeah, I think that's to coach at different levels of the game. Your game is going to be quite different. So I think it's really important for coaches, especially developing coaches, to understand what the game you're aspiring to play to, and what the game you actually play looks like. So, just using some, you don't need much technology to try to work out what maybe your minutes and play are. That's ball and play, and obviously at a subbies level would be quite different to a test match level, or a European Cup level or something like that. So to understand that, that may be whatever it may be, and then you can, if you've got someone who can do it, or if you've got the time yourself, to try to work out what the passages of play might look like. But going back to the training, and I see, like when we're talking about those blocks, and like trying to create some real competition in your training, so it's actually competitive, like the game is, rather than say Team A are going to play 5 phases or keep the ball for 2 minutes. I'd play it where, like, if there's a turnover, the other team gets the ball. So you're playing 15 on 15. It could be body in front, sort of, you're not smashing each other, but if you don't put enough people on the breakdown, or a ball gets dropped, it's a turnover of the opposition. So you still play your 2-minute block or your 90-second block, whatever it is, but you've lost the ball. Now you've got to defend, because that's what the game is. And if you genuinely want to get some intensity around your training, that's the way to do it. If you play where we lost the ball, so we'll start again, or yeah, we knocked it on there, but we'll just keep playing, it doesn't really develop the competitive understanding for the game, and it doesn't sort of instill that discipline under some pressure of looking after the ball, executing your skills and your passing, making sure that you support the breakdown, making sure that your player on the floor makes a good ball presentation for your halfback. All those little parts of the game which are going to be really, really important in the big moment if you know in the competition.
Yeah, I guess you've sort of identified one of my, I guess, my pet peeves in teams when we're coaching, and let's say we start from a line out or we start from a scrum, and the line out either, they knock it on, or they don't achieve what they set out to achieve, or the first pass off the scrum is dropped by the fly half, and straight away they just stop, think, oh, we'll start again. And I'm trying to constantly reinforce to the players, no, we're not stopping. We're going to have mistakes in games like this, and we have to adjust and learn how to adapt. We're now basically in a turnover position. We've got to play from going from an attacking mindset or set up in an attacking shape, and now we've got to move into a defensive shape. And the opposing team now have to try and look at what their opportunities are to move the ball to space, or to identify if there's a kick on downfield, or whatever it might be. And I think those are some great learning opportunities for players. So I think you've really identified that really well, and I think that's also a really big thing for young or emerging coaches to be aware of as well.
Yeah, I think like really, when I look in my current role, I'm supporting coaches across the spectrum. Some of them are in the high performance end, but some of them are still working around the community end of the game here in Ireland. And what I really notice when you go back to the community game, is that as you say, there's that very much stop-start training, which is not really like the game is, and I'm sure it's the same in community rugby in Australia as well. But certainly, I think for coaches and young coaches, when you're trying to really plan your week, I mean, the hardest thing as a coach is you always feel as though you haven't got enough time. I mean, it doesn't seem to matter if you're at a professional level when you've got your players for quite a bit of time during the week, or you're a club coach who feels, "God, I've only got them for 2 nights a week. How am I going to get through all of this?" But certainly to block it down, to say, well, we're going to do some. There's going to be a block of, commonly we call it install, where there's going to be some coaching. You're going to be looking at maybe refining something that you want to get better at. It might be something new you're introducing to your toolbox of plays or whatever. So the players understand that this block is install. We're going to do it maybe at low pace. There's time to talk. There's time to adjust. Wider, closer, flatter, deeper. Need the ball earlier, or whatever it may be to get it right. So they understand that install part of training. So that's when you do your talking and your adjusting. And if someone drops the ball, it's not the end of the world to say, well, let's do it again. But when you get into those blocks, which may be your high pressure block, or your competition block, or whatever you like to call it, that the players understand that this block of training is our high pressure block, and it could be on a Tuesday night. It might only be like 16 minutes of rugby. It might be 4 blocks of 4 minutes.
Yep.
It might be the last thing you do. In reality, your 4 minutes is probably 3 minutes, and you can have a little team talk between, or a little water break, or whatever you want. But then you're going hard for that time, and the players understand what it is there, and they understand that this block is competitive, because you want to test your game toolbox under some intensity. You don't want to be testing it on Saturday, when you're playing, a a big rival in one of the bigger games of the year, and trying out something you haven't really tested under pressure at training.
And what's your philosophy or your thoughts around that idea of perfect practice makes perfect? Or if you're trying to create that stress or create that competition and play at a higher speed, you got to be more likely to see more mistakes than if you played more controlled and like you during that install period. It's we're going a little bit slower. It might not be as much pressure in terms of each pass and each catch and so forth. As a coach, is it something that you would be upset with if you see that error rate increase, or is it something that you're expecting so you can understand that and it's just we need a bit more clarity before we get to the game on the weekend? What's your thoughts? Because from my own conversations with coaches around different levels of the game, I guess a lot of pressure on practice performance leading into the weekend's game. So that Thursday night, at the end of training, oh, we were horrible, so many drop balls. But then, the pace of training was really good, or the intensity was really good. So from that perspective, I thought it was quite good. But because it was such a high intensity, there were a few more mistakes. Sometimes, we might assess that as being a really poor training session. What's like with all your experience? How do you view that? Sorry, I've dragged that question on way too long, mate. Sorry.
No, that's right. It's interesting, and I've been in a lot of conversations around this with different coaching staff and at different coaching sort of seminars and workshops I've been to, and it is a big can be a big discussion point. And I think for me myself, and probably for a lot of young coaches, that you're looking for that perfect practice, and probably we were training our teams probably a little bit under intensity to get that perfect practice, because we felt that when things were going really well at practice, that things would go really well in the game. But then with experience and then seeing things operating at a high level and high level games, and probably understanding the coaching and learning process more, being more comfortable with mistakes in training, because then you say, well, we're actually really testing our players now, because it is different. What you'd expect to see is maybe week on week, or the error rate may reduce. And you can expect things when if you're introducing something new, the error rate could be a little bit higher than if you're doing something that you've been doing for the last 3 or 4 weeks. But also what's important is that's where your training review is really, really important. That having some hopefully good quality vision of your training, so you can actually look at things. Why did something break down, or why was an error? Could be an individual error. It could be a system error in that players weren't in the right position or supporting the play properly, or it could be an error because it was the wrong decision under the passing to a player who is marked by 2 players, whereas it may have been better to carry the ball into some space, something like that. But so your review of your training is really, really important, and then looking at how do we feed that back to the players. Is it a team thing? So that's a team review. Is it an individual error? Could be an individual review where you where you address it with the player and say, look at this, you did X or Y where maybe you could have done Z.
Yeah.
I think so. That's really, really important. And for coaches, especially for probably coaches in the community game or development, how do I find the time to do all this? How do I get the information back to the players? So that's I think it's important to find 2 or 3 important things that you're going after, and if you're going to show them some footage, review it on those 2 or 3 things you're going after. Don't pick out 10 things from training and then think on Thursday I'm going to show that to them and get ready for the game and do everything else. There might be three things that we're going after. Here's three examples from training. Two we did really well. One we didn't do so well. What happened? Yeah, and then we move on.
Yeah.
You using social media. I mean, for young players now that they're really comfortable with that. Could be sending a WhatsApp clip to a group, to the forwards, to the backs, to the team. Have a look at this before training tonight. This is what we're focusing on, and then have a look at these couple of clips from Tuesday night's training. Here are some things that we're working on tonight, or do an individual, send an individual clip with a little note on it, and that's so you can do a lot of your coaching when you're in a community club, when you're short of time. You can do a lot of your coaching before you get there, and then when you're at training, or if it's the second day of the week, there's nothing wrong with doing a little. So we're going to do a mini install tonight because we're just brushing up on something that we learned from Tuesday. That's fine to do that, but then make sure you still do your high speed competitive block as well.
Yeah.
So the players have got they feel like they're ready to play. So that when they leave training, they really feel that they've nailed it going into the game.
Yeah, that I guess part of your answer as well there just made me think. You talked about reviewing training, and I guess that's a big part of the professional game. But for younger coaches or emerging coaches, it might just be setting up a camera on the side and getting an opportunity to film their training and review that themselves as well, so that they can review themselves in terms of their own coaching, but also go back and review what they've seen on the training paddock, because we're not perfect and we don't see absolutely everything. So I think, again, that's another good message for younger or emerging coaches to record training. And maybe it doesn't have to be every time, but having sessions where they're recording it, reviewing it, or looking at their own performance, and also using it as a tool for player development. Going on from that, you've obviously coached internationally with Fiji, and you've had a lot of success internationally. Where in your career did you go from shoot shield to this professional world of coaching? What were the sort of steps, I guess, that took you that way?
Well, it was interesting. Like at that, I mean, partly, I mean, I think when I look back on my coaching career, I think I was lucky at the time. I was coming into coaching. I mean, I've already alluded to how I was coming through the Australian rugby coaching system when they were very aligned with the AIS. So I felt that in that transition from the amateur into the professional, I learned a lot. I learned a lot from that, and learned a lot from other sports. At the end of the 2000s, I mean, like Australian rugby were obviously very strong, won the World Cup in 1999. Like around the world, other countries were looking at Australia. What are they doing so well? There things, Rod McQueen had, initially with the Brumbies and then with the Wallabies was probably brought in some very innovative, was quite setting the pace. I mean, Australian coaches were probably in demand, and people were looking at Australia to see what they were doing, and I went to France for 2 seasons. I went to Clermont in France, and that was really the first time I was in a fully professional setup, and it was a little bit of blowing away then of going into French rugby and seeing the level of professionalism there, and even compared to Super Rugby at the time in Australia, and went there with 2 other Australian coaches, and Tim Lane and Steve Nance, and we had quite a bit of success at Clermont. We got to the final of the French Championship in the first year, which was a great achievement. Unfortunately, got beaten by Toulouse, but that was my first time in a fully professional environment, and it was also a time when the sport was growing so fast. I mean, we still weren't using GPS then, but we were trying to be innovative around our trainings and how we integrated the rugby with small-sided games and that type of thing, which was some of the innovation I feel at that time was coming out of Australia, that small-sided games approach to the game. I mean, up till then, I think a lot of the European rugby had been very much athletic development and rugby separate. So we were trying to incorporate that. And then following there, I went to Ireland for 3 years and worked with Connacht in the it's now the URC, but it was the Celtic Cup back in those days. So that was also quite formative time for Irish rugby. Professional rugby was just growing. It was a great time for me as a coach, because I felt I was growing as a coach as well, and it was almost like the new frontier. We were trying things. We were trying to be innovative. We were incorporating things into. It was a great time to be involved in rugby and rugby coaching, because things were changing quite quickly. I mean, you're almost trying to catch up, but you're trying to stay ahead of the game at the same time. So, came back to Australia at that time, and I felt that knowledge I'd gained by being involved in two very different environments in Ireland and France really helped me coming back to Australia and looking at how I could do things a little bit differently, how I could approach the game differently, and worked with the Central Coast Rays in the infamous Australian Rugby Championship, which lasted for only one season, unfortunately, but we had a very good season there, and it was a great opportunity to work with a mix of Super Rugby players and also developing players in that competition. So that opened some doors for me around November tours. Teams were looking for technical coaches for the November tours to Europe, and I went away with a combined Pacific team, and that was my first involvement with Pacific rugby really, and international rugby, of being a technical advisor on the Pacific Islanders in that was 2008 or 2008, I think. And then on the back of that, I went with Tonga the following November, and then worked with Tonga around the 2011 Rugby World Cup, and then that was really opened the door for me to the opportunity came for Fiji a couple of years later. So an interesting pathway. I mean some luck and things like some things weren't wasn't really planning a career pathway, but some doors opened up for me which led me in the right direction.
Without sounding rude and trying to play your career down at all, is there any luck or being in the right place at the right time for coaches?
I think things have changed. Things have changed hugely, and I think back then it was probably an opportunity would present itself rather than be actually searching for it. There was probably some luck, or it's probably not so much luck, but timing was probably important. I mean, it's still a little bit the same today. I mean, the interesting thing is, because the cultures are quite different in different areas, and you see quite successful coaches going into another rugby culture and not being very successful at all. So yeah, the right timing and the right environment is still very important. Sometimes sometimes the jacket fits. Stuart Lancaster is probably an example. Highly successful in his role at Leinster and was a big driver of their success in his time here in Ireland. Goes to racing in Paris. The rugby culture quite different. Things don't quite work out probably for a whole lot of reasons, and not to do with the coaching, but around the culture and maybe some injuries they may have had or some other factors they had along the way. And so sometimes the jacket fits almost, that the coach really marries in with the culture. Sometimes it's difficult for a coach to change his style to suit the culture, if you know what I mean. When I got some involvement with the Pacific, I really liked their culture, and I think for me as a personality, it it suited to, and I had to change some things up there, most certainly, but that my personality suited the Pacific culture, and working both with Tonga and Fiji.
I think you've hit the nail on the head there. Timing is probably the right word. I think you're right, like timing and selection of who you're coaching, because I think, like you pointed out with Stuart Lancaster, great job at Leinster, and then having a few issues for whatever reason in the French system. That change of culture can be a big factor as well. And I guess that leads us to that question you just talked about, how being involved in Pacific sides, you felt really comfortable, and you've obviously done very well in those environments. You were raised in New Zealand, you've coached in Australia, France, obviously the Pacific Islands, in Ireland. So you've been involved in a whole heap of different cultures and rugby playing cultures. How important is buying into those different cultures, or a priority for a coach, especially a coach who's a foreign coach going into the Pacific Islands or to France?
I think, look, for me, I think I'm really advantaged because my coaching pathways brought me from club level to professional levels to international levels. So I've coached at all levels of the game, and that gives me a grounding. Like, I understand where rugby comes from. So it's almost, I wouldn't say it doesn't matter, but when I go to different places, I see where the game grows from, and that helps me understand the culture of the game, if you know what I mean. It could be different. I think it's different for coaches now, for some of the coaches I see coming through, because now we've got a generation who have been professional rugby players and go into coaching. So their whole involvement in rugby really has been in that professional environment, and that can mean, I'm not saying it doesn't mean, but it can mean that they are limited by just understanding the environment they've been in. So it could be difficult for a coach who has been a professional player in the UK and has gone into coaching, and then to go to another environment because his whole rugby being is in that environment. And just as it could be difficult for a coach in Australia who's come through Super Rugby as a player, gone into coaching, understands the Super Rugby way of playing very, very well, could find it hard to go into a France or an Ireland where the culture is, well, the style is quite different, and as a coach you do need to change, and you're not going to change the culture of the place, but the skill is influencing them with the best that you can bring from outside and blending it with the best of what they've got, because every major rugby country has its own strengths, and a lot of that is built on the history of the game. I'm a great believer in that the history of the game is part of the national rugby identity.
You're now in Ireland. You're now working with women as well in rugby, in the rugby space. You're working in terms of coach development and mentoring other coaches. What are some of the big things that you've seen, or the big changes?
Yeah, so coming here to Ireland in this role, obviously something very, very different for me, coming into the women's side of the game, and for me, when this opportunity came up, I mean, there is some connection here in Ireland, and that my wife is originally from here, so we've got connections in Ireland. So it was attractive for me to come to Ireland for personal and family reasons, not just a career move. But certainly I saw the excitement of for me to be involved in something which was very new and growing, and to bring my experience from a long coaching career in and be able to make a difference on an emerging program. And that they're investing a lot of money in their women's program here in terms of developing pathways for talented players, and using my experience from a wide range of environments to say that think that this is how we can really make our high performance pathway effective. And for me now, I'd hope that when I leave here that they can say that I did have some influence over the way that the game has evolved here in Ireland on the women's side of things, it's quite different. It's interesting from a coaching perspective. I think my experience with the women players, they really want to learn, and they want to get good at the game. So that from a coaching perspective, that it's really enjoyable to work with them. To see the growth here in Ireland in 2.5 years has been very satisfying to feel that somehow you're part of that. And it's certainly for rugby, it's going to be interesting. The Rugby World Cup this year for women's rugby, I think it'll really grow the game, and you can see in Europe with football that the profile of women's sport is getting really high. So it's important for rugby as a whole and for world rugby in that growth area. I feel that to keep the game really relevant in the going into the future.
And you mentioned earlier on that the growth in the women's game in Ireland has been pretty massive as well.
Yeah, it's really interesting here. I mean, and I'm sure other parts of the world are the same. I'm sure in Australia it's similar, but seeing lots of young women playing the game and the way things are in Ireland. I mean, a lot of it's a lot of their small country towns, small country rugby clubs where they've got lots of young girls and young women taking up the game and playing the game, and it's exciting. It creates another part of the rugby landscape, which is important.
And one of the other parts of your roles is you talked about coach development and mentoring. What advice would you give to some younger or emerging coaches about developing a career in coaching and if they have aspirations to become a professional or career coach in the future?
Look, I think it's really important to keep abreast of the way the game's going, the high performance aspects of the game. I mean, at the high levels of the game, things move very, very quickly. And as a young or aspiring coach, if you're working in Australia around the community game, or you're in the school game, or wherever you may be, take opportunity as much as you can to try to see what's happening around Super Rugby. Make it form a good network of maybe people that you can tap into every now and again, and it could be someone on the S&C side of things. It could be someone who's involved in coaching at that level to go in and have a look at what they're doing, maybe observe some sessions, that type of thing, because I think that's the missing factor. It's not just a drag up effect from the top. You've got to really seek that out. It's the information is very slow coming down through the levels of the game, and you can get left behind quite quickly. So if you're aspirational, look at that. I think that'll help you in your pathway. Those networks you develop will really open up possible opportunities for you. But also, I guarantee that some of the things you learn there will be able to, you'll bring some innovative things back to wherever you're coaching, and it'll have an impact on your team. Your players will enjoy the game more. It'll be impactful. It'll transfer into their performance. So there's going to be some seeking out that information. There's going to be some immediate benefits with the team you're coaching, but I think it's also going to help you develop your coaching to the level that opportunities will open up for you.
Yeah, that's some great advice. And in terms of mentoring, Do you think it's an important factor? Do you think young coaches should find someone who can mentor them, or be a critical friend, even that just can help, just can look at what they're doing and give them some feedback or some advice?
Yeah, I think that's really important. Someone who's outside the sphere of your your club or your school or your provincial team or whatever it may be that you can tap into, that maybe you can come down and have a look at, observe your training, or observe when you're meeting with the players, give you a bit of feedback on your games. I mean, doesn't have to be week on week, but it's someone you can get some feedback from, and it would be good to not just have to be such a formal written agreement, but understand between the two of you what you're, as a coach, what you're looking for, and what feedback that the mentor might give you. Otherwise, it becomes a whole lot of nice, good conversations, but it doesn't lead anywhere. I think if at the start of the season you might have two or three things that you're going after, your mentor might, on some occasions during the season, give you some feedback on that, and then at the end of the season you might meet up and say, well, let's have a look at it. Sort of completes the loop, and you might be ticking all the boxes, or you might be saying, yeah, look, those two things, yeah, we really made some good progress. There's a bit of a gap here in this other area, so that's going to be my off season. I'm going to seek out some information on that, and I'm going to learn for next year in that gap area.
Yeah, awesome, great advice. And yeah, I think a lot of like younger coaches that are aspirational should be trying to find someone. And again, it doesn't have to be every week. It doesn't, you might just have, 3 or 4 touch points throughout the year that they can sort of go back to and review themselves. And like you said, record themselves at training, and they can, use some of that feedback from the mentor to do their own analysis of their own coaching, because that's also going to help them develop and improve, and look at their own skills. Last question, mate, and I can let you go, get back to your day. Looking ahead, what excites you most about the future of rugby, and what do you hope to contribute to it yourself next?
But I love the way the game. There are different ways of playing the game, and I don't think we should aspire to have just one sort of game. And looking at how different teams at different times can have successful periods with with a way of playing, and how other teams are innovative and bring in new tactics and strategies which maybe give them a jump on the field. And so the way the game is continually evolving, and it can be, sometimes it's like a game of chess. Sometimes it's a very flowing and almost a festival of rugby, and everything in between. That's what excites me. What needs to change? I mean, it's an eternal problem, but to get consistent across the global game in terms of the refereeing, I see things can be quite different in Super Rugby to European rugby. Even in the Lions Tour now, you see it's a little bit different if you have in some of the provincial games, like if you had a Kiwi ref or a European ref, the way things are refereed. I would hope going forward that they really refine the TMO part of the game. It's really important that we clamp down on any sort of dangerous play or dangerous tackles and that sort of thing, causing especially any sort of concussions or head knocks. But we've got to avoid the situation where some of the international we've seen recently, where there's a lot of breaks in play, a lot of going back to the TMO. They've got to get that side of the game a lot better. I think that as a spectacle, the game is very, very exciting, but it loses a lot of momentum if they're continually having those breaks. For me, I just want to really keep contributing to the game wherever I am, and I'm really probably in a really good space at the moment, working around these high performance pathways, areas of the game. I feel I can really contribute to that areas of the game from my experience and knowledge, gained over many, many years in different environments, and really just looking to make a difference in the game. For me, it's not about winning or losing. It's about making a difference.
Awesome. John, thanks so much for taking the time in your day to have a chat with me. I really appreciate it. I've actually asked a lot of questions that I sort of, I was interested to hear myself, to hear your answers, and for my own development, for my own learning. So I'm sure there's a lot of coaches out there, emerging coaches and younger coaches, that would be really interested to hear some of your insights. So thank you so much, mate. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you, James. Yeah, it's been a pleasure. Really enjoyed chatting with you.
Some of the key takeaways from me from this conversation sit around how we structure our training sessions. We often hear comments like train harder than we play or train at higher speeds, which is great in theory. However, when we do this, we create more intense environments for the players, so we almost have to expect more mistakes. For us coaches, mistakes are okay. It's where the athletes learn, and it's where we can create learning opportunities. John highlighted this by his approach to structuring intense blocks and then install blocks, and using training reviews for individual and group feedback opportunities. Secondly, with John's experience, it was great to get some advice for younger emerging coaches who want to build their experience or develop themselves by learning from others, and using mentors periodically throughout the season and challenging the status quo to find new ways to play the game. Finally, it's great to hear John talk about his passion of the game and his passion to keep developing athletes at all levels. From a guy who has coached at the highest level and coached in French club championship matches, his willingness to give back to the grassroots and all other levels of the game is a testament to his willingness to put the future of the game first. I hope you've enjoyed this conversation with John and learned something new. Until next time on the Coach Doctor podcast, keep learning.